Today on Ag News Daily.
I want something that's innovative, right? I don't want to sell a pen because there's 700 different pen manufacturers out there. So something that's innovative, an untapped market, and good people. I don't want to make bad people rich. I want to make good people rich.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. How are you, Delaney?
I'm good. Well rested after vacation.
You got a full night's rest last night, didn't you?
I went to bed at 7:30, so I missed the Iowa Hawkeye game, but Iowa fans certainly are excited, and Iowa State plays tonight, so we'll see how that goes.
That's right. Well, after one of the warmest winters on record, a strong ridge of high pressure is continuing to dominate our weather pattern across the western and central U.S. We're still seeing some drought conditions improve, only slightly, though, over the past week. Total drought coverage in the lower 48 only dropped by 1%, but is roughly 75% of the country is still in some level of drought. Soil moisture deficits are still significant across most of central U.S., creating concerns as spring field work begins. A stronger front is expected to move in through the Midwest today. That will unsettle into this weekend to bring another round of colder air, along with some scattered showers and the potential for a few severe thunderstorms. The colder temperatures could be short-lived, though, as a more active weather pattern develops next week. That could bring additional thunderstorms and heavier rainfall, which would rebuild some of that soil moisture and ease those drought concerns just ahead of our spring planting. But let's take a break for our partner and get back to the news after this ad.
You wouldn't shave half your face.
Oh no.
Or chop down half a tree. So why leave weeds half finished? Cairo herbicide from Corteva Agriscience delivers complete control with a novel triple-action premix formula, the ultimate application flexibility, and season-long protection against tough weeds. Cairo herbicide, going all the way, is the only way. Visit corteva.us/complete.
Well, Tanner, the House version of the Farm Bill has cleared committee as of earlier this month, as we reported, and is now waiting for a floor vote before moving to the full Senate. U.S. Representative from Iowa, Randy Feenstra, says the bill includes provisions to expand trade, strengthen food safety, and protect farmland from foreign ownership. He expects enough bipartisan support in the House to move the bill forward, although a floor vote that leaders once hoped to hold by Easter has not yet been scheduled. In the Senate, John Boozman says he wants to begin work on the legislation, but disagreements still remain over SNAP cost sharing. Proposition 12 language and pesticide labeling reforms also remain key issues. Both Senators John Boozman and Amy Klobuchar agree year-round E15 should be included in that final bill. So Easter weekend, Tanner, is just over a week away.
It's right around the corner.
Not thinking they're going to have that vote in place by then before their recess.
No, but we still have biofuel groups working really hard. There's been more than 20 ag groups and those biofuel groups that have visited and asked the White House for several federal agencies earlier this week on Wednesday to provide more clear guidelines to the 45Z tax credit. This is designed to support the use of ethanol and other biofuels in aviation fuel. The group says the credit is important as farmers continue to face tight margins, with projected production costs exceeding expected revenues. In the letter, the group says the biofuels remain a key market for U.S. agriculture and that a stable long-term incentive like the 45Z credit are needed to strengthen the demand for fuels that are made from American-grown feedstocks. They added, though, that clear guidance will help farmers and lenders make decisions on capital investments, inputs, and crop management, all for the next several growing seasons. The EPA also announced emergency waivers this week, allowing summertime sales of E15. This came earlier than usual. It is to help avoid fuel disruptions experienced during last summer. Since 2022, the agency has issued similar waivers under the Clean Air Act starting May 1st. But this year's early announcement responds to the global energy concerns. The waivers also included E10 in 7 Midwestern states to ensure compatibility across fuel pumps. While the waivers provided short-term relief, farm state lawmakers, like Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, are pushing for permanent E15 legislation. which would give retailers and refiners and corn growers year-round certainty and stability. This would provide benefits both to the ethanol industry and to consumers at the pump.
Well, good news to see that it has been seeing movement earlier in the season. Maybe the early spring is getting folks anticipating here for summer, but continuing on with some EPA-related headlines. EPA Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin says the agency plans to release new renewable volume obligation blending requirements before the end of the month. Speaking during National Ag Day events this week in Washington, D.C., Zeldin said the updated numbers are being finalized through an interagency process after the EPA inherited a large backlog of unfinished work, including delayed renewable volume obligations that were originally due in November of 2024. Administrator Zeldin says the EPA is also working through backlogs involving pesticide reviews, new chemical approvals, and small refinery exemption requests. He says the missed RVO deadline will, quote, will never again be blown, and that the agency is working to ensure future deadlines are met. That's some bold statements to make that it won't be missed again, Tanner.
I had to relook to make sure those were in quotes.
Those were in quotes, yeah. It's directly from his mouth.
That's right. Well, we're getting some fertilizer cost transparency updates. A bipartisan group of senators introduced late last week the Fertilizer Transparency Act, a bill that would require mandatory fertilizer price reporting to provide more market information for buyers and sellers. This legislation comes as fertilizer prices have surged following the war in Iran. This is, of course, adding more pressure to already tight farm margins that we aren't a stranger to. We saw Senator Amy Klobuchar say that farmers are dealing with rising fertilizer costs and low commodity prices, making greater price transparency even more important now. The bill would also aim to encourage more domestic fertilizer production and storage. Market analyst Josh Linville, friend of the podcast of StoneX, says the Middle East urea prices have climbed $285 per ton, or about 60%, since the Strait of Hormuz was closed 3 weeks ago. That's a big climb, Delaney.
That certainly is. I had to reread that again, as you said that as well, but 60% certainly going to impact those bottom lines. And as we continue on with more news out of the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump has extended the deadline now twice for Iran to reopen the strait, now until April 6th, giving negotiators more time as tensions in the Middle East continue to rise and disrupt energy and fertilizer markets alike. The waterway remains critical for global shipments of oil and crop nutrients, and analysts say the uncertainty is already lifting fertilizer costs ahead of spring planting season. Some 60%, as you just mentioned there, Tanner. So going to continue to keep an eye on that story. We're working to get an interview with Josh Linville so we can talk more about this in depth. But let's now switch tracks and hear a quick tip as we head into the growing season from Ron Geis of Corteva Agriscience for this episode's Tips with Corteva Agriscience.
You can't raise two crops in the same field at the same time. And when weeds are there, it's just like having two crops in the same field at the same time. So farmers, you need powerful season-long weed control that starts fields clean and finishes strong with good yields. Corteva Agriscience, we have the crop protection solutions for corn, for soybeans, cotton, wheat, tree nuts, fruits, sugar beets, and everything in between. Visit us at corteva.com/US for more information.
Well, thanks for that tip, Ron. We saw the University of Missouri Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute say that the outlook of farm finances remains mixed across agriculture. According to their latest 2026 U.S. Ag Market Outlook they released just this week. Most of our row crop producers continue to face those weak returns, according to that report, although grain and oilseed prices are expected to improve modestly throughout the rest of 2026. Corn is projected to average $4.31 a bushel for the 26 crop year, while soybeans are forecasted at $10.39 per bushel for the same 26-27 marketing year. The report says prices for wheat, cotton, rice, sorghum, and other crops are also expected to climb slightly, but we'll still see tight margins. The livestock sector continues to tell a different story. Smaller U.S. beef cow herd has helped drive record cattle prices and strong returns for those cow-calf producers. However, the Institute says the strong profits are expected to eventually lead to herd rebuilding, with cattle prices beginning to decline later in 2027. So I don't know if we got any earth-shattering news out of that report, but it's good to have those statements reaffirmed.
Well, the 10th annual Feeding the Economy report was also released earlier this week on Monday, showing U.S. food and agriculture generating more than $10.4 trillion in economic activity and accounting for nearly 20% of the nation's economy. The industry supports nearly 49 million jobs across farming, manufacturing, processing, transportation, retail, and food service, while generating more than $3 trillion in wages and $1.35 trillion in tax revenue. Food manufacturing remains the nation's largest manufacturing sector, employing more than 2.2 million workers. The report also highlights challenges, however, facing the industry, including slower job growth in farming and food manufacturing, a difficult farm economy, and weaker exports. U.S. food and agriculture exports totaled more than $177 billion, down about $5.4 billion from the year earlier. The report says those trends underscore the need for strong trade agreements, expanded market access, and continued support for domestic food and agriculture production. But I can't even fathom that many trillions of dollars, Tanner.
Yeah, it's fascinating, too, what the price of corn could have, if we were selling for $5 a bushel instead of $4.31. How much closer that number gets. But we did get new data that was analyzed this week from the U.S. Economic Research Service that shows that our U.S. farmers and ranchers are receiving a shrinking share of every food dollar. Crop producers capture about 2.5 cents, and livestock producers about 3.3 cents. That's of every dollar spent. That is a combined total of 5.8 cents, down slightly from the 5.9 that was recorded in 2023. Overall, farmers receive 11.8 cents of every dollar spent on domestically produced food in 2024, a 2.5% decrease from the previous year, while that remaining 88.2 cents goes to processing, transportation, packaging, wholesaling, retail, and food service to round out that dollar. Faith Barnum from the American Farm Bureau's Federation says that the farmer's share varies by commodity, with minimally processed products like eggs earning a higher share, while highly processed foods capture less. She adds that even as grocery prices rise, farmers remain price takers, with most of the consumer dollars still going to the services and supply chain activities rather than going back to the farm gate. So I wonder how we fix that.
That's decades and decades of a problem to solve, John. Probably not one we're going to solve on this podcast, Tanner. Continuing on a few headlines from the USDA, however, the National Agricultural Statistics Service reported in the last week that over 2 million landowners rented out 348 million acres of farmland in 2024, according to the latest tenure, ownership, and transition of agriculture land survey, the total survey,
That's much
if
easier.
you will. About 79% of that land is owned by non-farming landlords, including private owners, trusts, and family entities. Rented farmland and associated buildings are valued at more than $1.6 trillion, generating $34.1 billion in rental income, while landlords incurred about $12 billion in operating expenses. That survey also shows that farmland transfers will be limited over the next 5 years, with 23 million acres expected to sell to non-relatives and 20 million acres to relatives or as gifts. Non-operating landlords remain older than active farmers, with an average age of 69.2, and over half have never farmed. Total also provides a key look at land ownership trends, helping guide policy, researchers, and the ag industry on planning and market analysis. So certainly an interesting report there.
I don't think we've ever shared that report before.
I don't think we
so
have
a great
either.
addition to the podcast. Some neat information there. I'll have to re-listen back. The U.S. Department of Ag has slightly lowered its 26 beef production forecast last week to 25.81 billion pounds. That's down 110 million pounds from last month. The reduction reflects an unexpected drop in fed cattle slaughter early in the year, partially offset by heavier carcass weights and slightly higher second quarter slaughter. Meanwhile, though, the dairy sector is expected to grow, with the cow herd averaging 9.57 million head and milk production rising to 234.7 billion pounds. Pork production forecasts remain unchanged at 28.3 billion pounds, which was up 2.5% from 25. Poultry, the first half of 26 broiler production was raised based upon recent hatchery data, though second quarter broiler prices were adjusted lower, while export projections are remaining steady. Nice little livestock news hit there.
Well, Tanner, this is a hard story to hear, but unfortunately, I think we're going to be hearing a lot more of them as the season continues and we see dryness throughout the country. The USDA is working to fast-track disaster assistance for producers impacted by recent wildfires that have been ongoing now for the last few weeks in the state of Nebraska and others. Undersecretary Richard Fordyce says emergency grazing will be opened on CRP acres to help ranchers relocate cattle, and the Emergency Conservation Program can cover up to 75% of the cost to rebuild damaged fences. Fordyce says producers should document losses for programs including the Livestock Indemnity Program and Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish programs by taking photos, saving receipts, and contacting their local FSA office. Meanwhile, wildfires in Nebraska have burned about 775,000 acres of pasture, destroying a major feed source in one of the nation's top beef-producing states. The loss of grazing land is expected to slow efforts to rebuild the U.S. cattle herd, even as cattle prices remain historically strong. Ranchers may be forced to move cattle, rely on more expensive feed, or reduce herd sizes in the short term as some possible solutions for this shift in available pasture land, Tanner.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for those folks. Well, we did see a federal appeals court has upheld Florida's ban on lab-grown meat this week. This is keeping in place the restrictions that were first enacted in 2024. That decision is a setback for advocates that are seeking to expand the sale of lab-grown protein, which is produced by growing animal cells in bioreactors. The Center for Environmental and Welfare says the ban reflects concerns over the lack of long-term health studies on the product. While the federal government approved lab-grown meat in 2023, 7 other states have also passed legislation that have been banning this sale, citing safety and consumer expectations. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative headline, but it's certainly news we get to share.
It certainly is. Oh, keeping on some similar fronts here as it relates to our food and products of the USA, on National Ag Day in Washington, D.C., Secretary Rollins announced a public awareness campaign for USDA's new Product of the USA, which is going to be voluntary labeling standards, which took effect back on January 1st of 2026. The label ensures that meat, poultry, and egg products that are entirely born, raised, and harvested and processed in the United States will now get that voluntary label. Secretary Rollins says the campaign is designed to help consumers understand the label and, of course, support American producers and products, stating, quote, "This standard strengthens our food supply chain through transparency, fairness, and trust." She also added that it gives producers a level playing field and consumers confidence in the food that they buy. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK echoed that the label empowers families to choose food raised right here at home. I've not seen that label yet, Tanner, but I'll certainly be looking for it at the grocery store.
That's right. Well, it's time for this week's interview. This week on the podcast, we're joined by a good friend of ours and fellow podcaster, Jeremy. We will dive into what has inspired him to start his business, Thunderstruck Ag. And we get to hear about his journey on the Ag Warriors podcast. So let's jump into that conversation right now.
We're catching up with Jeremy Matuszewski, the owner of Thunderstruck Ag and the Ag Warriors podcast. If you haven't checked it out, go and do that. It's on all of the major podcasting platforms. And Jeremy, we're going to learn more about the Ag Warriors podcast today, your background, and all of the things that make up Jeremy. So thanks for joining us.
Wow, we only have 15 minutes, though. That's not a lot of time to get
That's
through all
true.
that.
We might have to have a part 2 sometime.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
But I find it super interesting. Let's start back at the beginning, if you will, a little bit. We don't have the time to go through your whole life story, but you are natively from Pennsylvania.
Born in Pennsylvania.
But you live in Canada.
But I live in Canada.
And you started a business there.
I did.
So how did that all come together?
To make a long story super short, I went to Canada to play hockey, met a girl, was working for somebody else, and started having kids and was working for somebody else, and just I sold $20 million and I made 75 grand. I was like, this just doesn't make sense. And so I started a business there to help small to medium-sized businesses sell their products.
And you're selling a variety of different agricultural products.
I am now. At that time, I wasn't.
Oh.
I wasn't even, when I started this, I wasn't even going to be an ag. I'd never even been on a farm before. So what do I know about agriculture? But yeah, we started. My first product was an oil and gas invented by farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And my second product was a fiber optic wireless internet company that I needed to talk to farmers about putting stuff on their grain legs. And then I had a spoked gauge wheel, and the rest is history.
So you kind of just fell into agriculture in the business.
Literally fell into agriculture. Yeah.
So Thunderstruck Ag.
Yep.
Tell us the business model. What do you do with all of the different companies you work with?
So we help those companies market, sell, and distribute their products around the world. 90% of our products were invented by farmers. So a farmer comes up with a really cool idea that solves a problem on their farm, and then they're farmers. So they need somebody to help them market, sell, and distribute their products, and that's where we come in. And then about 4 years ago, I started inventing some of our own products, and that's a whole nother story.
So for those farmers that are out tinkering in their garage, their shop, they come up with an idea. They like to do that part of it, but they don't want to do all the other stuff of fulfillment and sales and marketing. That's where your company comes in and really helps them.
Totally. And some of those farmers, they have set up manufacturing. They can build the product, and they still farm, so they don't have time to build the product and do all the trade shows and all the stuff that we love to do. And some of them, they've come up with a really cool idea, and then it's like, okay, we can help them patent it, and then we can find somebody to manufacture it for them as well. So really it's based on what the farmer has created and what the need is, and yeah.
And so is it all equipment that you're working within?
Yeah, for the most part, it's all equipment. I mean, we did find a really cool sensor out of Brazil that we've brought because our manufacturers, our farmers that we work with are from all around the world. We have some from Australia, now some from Brazil, some from the United States, some from Canada. So, but most of it's equipment.
How did you ever come up? I mean, I understand that you kind of fell into agriculture, but the business model itself, how did you come up with this idea and put it into place?
You know, my thought is there's a whole bunch of companies out there that have really great products, and there's a really big market, but they don't know how necessarily to reach that market, and they don't quite understand maybe how to sell or how to market. So I was just like, I'm going to start a company to help those companies, and turns out there's a whole whack load of companies in agriculture that could use that. And so here we are.
That is an interesting way that you kind of just came into it. What's the biggest lesson you've learned as you've been working with these various farmers and companies?
Oh man, there's been so many lessons. Like when I started, we used to have a putting green to bring people into our booth because we needed people to come into our booth. We were a nobody. But the one thing about that is you go to Louisville and you have a putting green, you're going to get a whole bunch of people that don't know shit about farming that just want to sink a putt. Well, that doesn't necessarily help you sell products. So I think maybe one of the lessons was you don't need a gimmick. You need a product. If you've got a product, then people will come in. And I think there's a lot of companies still that are using different gimmicks to get people in the booth. And I walk by and I'm like, man, you just need a product. Yeah.
What's the neatest product that you feel like you guys have been exposed to or helped create yourself?
I mean, really the Matuszewski gauge wheel. I mean, that was my first real agricultural product. I wouldn't be sitting here if I hadn't worked with Matuszewski. I mean, they were my first client. We've been representing them for 12 of our 13 years. and my whole company is built around them. They brought me everything. I mean, so that's got to be the coolest product. There's some really neat products that we still represent, and then I've invented a pretty cool product, but Mudsmith is, I mean, and they're the greatest people. So, and that's one of the things I look for. Like, there's three things. I want something that's innovative, right? I don't want to sell a pen because there's 700 different pen manufacturers out there. So something that's innovative, an untapped market, and good people. I don't want to make bad people rich. I want to make good people rich. And so those are our three filters.
Yeah, I really didn't realize until you mentioned it already that you work more with farmers that were tinkering and making these products rather than just a manufacturing company. I hadn't realized that was a part of the business model.
Yeah, so we do represent some manufacturers as well that are existed. You know, they've got maybe their own dealer network, some of these things. But the company started to help farmers bring their products out, and it's kind of grown from there. But I still wouldn't work with a company if they, I mean, do they need us, right? Like, how can we help? Because if we can't help somebody, if they've already got an established network, then what's the point?
So you are also a tinkerer, is what I'm getting a sense of, because you said you've helped to create some of your own products. And you also do a podcast, the Ag Warriors podcast, which kind of blew my mind as we were starting to get to know each other. It's like, why do a podcast?
Honestly, it's because I fell in love with agriculture, and there's so many cool people. Like, you've been on the podcast, which go listen to her story. It's unbelievable. But there's so many cool people in agriculture, and there's so many cool stories, and people don't even realize, I mean, agriculture, it's the heart of America and of Canada and really of the world. And there's incredible stories out there. And I was just like, man, I want to tell, like, I've got this cool network of people and they all have cool stories. I'm going to help them tell stories and see who else I come along with and tell their story. So I don't, maybe I'm a storyteller. I don't know. It was not, somebody had said, hey, you should start a podcast. So I did.
I can relate to that. I think that was definitely our origin story as well. And I think you have this innate ability to pull stories out of people. When we did our interview, it was like, oh, I'm starting to reveal and talk about all these things that I had not necessarily intended to talk about, but you have a really good way of just pulling those threads out of people. And I really have appreciated that as we've gotten to watch and listen to the Ag Warriors podcast.
Oh, that's high praise. Yours was awesome. And Rob Sharkey told me, like, he was one of my first guests, and he's like, at the end, he gave me some really good pointers. He's like, you just need to shut up and let the other person talk. And I was like, all right, Rob, I got you. So I'm trying to channel my inner Rob Sharkey, but nobody tells stories as good as him.
So I'm curious, what is the story behind the name Thunderstruck Ag and the Ag Warriors podcast?
So the name behind the Thunderstruck name. So I grew up playing sports my whole life, and I was coming up, I had decided to start this company, and I was trying to come up with a name, and I was like, Top Shelf Sales and Marketing, like all these stupid things, like Top Shelf, because I played hockey, so like go Top Shelf, and I didn't settle on anything, and I was driving my middle son to hockey. I was coaching him in hockey, and we were listening to the hockey playlist, and Thunderstruck came on, and I was like, Thunderstruck Sales and Marketing. I was like, ooh, that sounds good. And I said to my assistant coach, Alex Cron, and I said, hey, Google what it means to be thunderstruck. And it means to be shocked or awed, like the word thunderstruck. And I was like, ooh, I really like that word. It's going to be Thunderstruck Sales and Marketing. And so that's where that came from. And then the concaves I invented, the album that Thunderstruck was on was the Razor's Edge, plus my concaves have a bit of a more aggressive edge, so that tied together. And Ag Warriors comes from like maybe 2014. We're doing trade shows. We're like carnies, right? Like I've been on the road for 8 weeks straight now, so we're doing a lot of farm shows. And I had said, like, this isn't for the week, right? Like trade show warriors. We're trade show warriors, and there's a whole Thunder family of trade show warriors that do all these shows. And then when I started the podcast, it was like, I want people that have battled, right? Like the ag warriors is like what, and your story is a good example. Some of the things that you had to battle through to get to where you were. Rob Sharkey, Emily Sharkey, Quick Dick, all these people, they've all had to face challenges, which to me makes them warriors. So it was like ag warriors. I'm not, I don't know why, like that's the best.
No, that's great. And you've told some really heart-wrenching stories. Going on the podcast, I was a little intimidated because I felt like maybe compared to some of the other guests you've had, I'm like, well, my story is definitely not as challenging as some of these others that people have gone through.
Your story was super challenging.
Well, thank you. But I think it's inspiring that you're focusing specifically on telling those stories, not that there's anything less of someone when they aren't self-made or have gone through that, but I think it just adds this layer of complexity to the stories that you're telling, is you're specifically picking people who have gone through a challenge or they've seen something that's maybe put them in a setback position and they've really just said, nope, we're going to grab life by the reins and make the most of this situation.
And those are the best stories. Like, let's be honest. And I wanted to inspire. My thought was, if people tell their stories, like your story is inspiring. So who else can it inspire? What other young, right out of college woman is maybe facing some battles that it's like, oh, well, I can do this. Or, Dmitry Kobzarenko in Ukraine, the one we just put out, like that dude's story, I mean, incredible, just perseverance, tenacity, overcoming so many things. And there's people all around this world going through tough times. Like, it's tough. And so maybe the 6 people that listen, I don't know how many listeners we have, but maybe somebody will hear a story and it'll inspire them. That's kind of that's what I would love.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that our listeners will check out the Ag Warriors podcast on every major podcasting network. Jeremy, thanks for joining us so much. I know we only got a glimpse of your story.
I'm sorry I'm late.
But it's going to come. We'll do this again sometime.
I'm in.
What a great conversation there, Delaney. But now, tell us what's happening in markets this week.
Well, the big focus is the next week's prospective plantings report, which we released on Tuesday, March 31st. And of course, we're starting to see early estimates about what folks are thinking we'll see for acres. Agmarket.net projected 2026 acres for corn to be at 94.4 million acres, down from 98 in 2025. Soybeans rising to 86.1, and all wheat at 46.4. Rabobank projects corn to be at 96 million acres, soybeans at 83 million acres, and despite rising input costs, corn acreage exceeds the USDA's forecast by about 2 million acres. That was back at their Ag Outlook Forum. The shift towards soybeans, driven by stronger prices, the corn to soy rotations and ratio, and higher corn planting costs, remain historically high despite the decline. Wheat acres also are expected to decline due to weak margins, while combined corn and soybean acres may exceed 2025 totals, and cotton and rice acres could shift as well, but that will be could be a big market report next week, as well as the quarterly grain stocks report when we see what is still in storage, but really the first time we get to see what's ahead for the 2026 growing season, Tanner.
Yeah, it'll be fun getting those planting progress reports as folks get started. Seeing a couple of those crossed X being putting some seeds in the ground. Our family is yet to, but we're certainly getting ready. And I do fear for those out in Nebraska, those ranchers that have had those wildfires hit. I know there's several ways that you can help them out as well, but I do say it's probably the best time of year for that to happen. We don't want to fire ever, but hopefully that generates new regrowth in those areas with fresh grass for those cattle to graze. But if you've got any stories you want us to make sure we cover, leave us comments on our social media. Hit us up. We always appreciate that. Make sure you share this with your friends. We'll be back again next week.
That's right. What do you say, Tammy? Let the people go.
Let's let them go.